The Mount Erebus disaster occurred on November 28, 1979, and since it is November 28 today, I've made a short video about this tragic event. It was New Zealand's worst aviation incident and also the worst peacetime disaster with 257 deaths. Justice Peter Mahorn accused Air New Zealand of an orchestrated litany of lies, alleging that they had intentionally misled investigators and the public. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight TE901, a DC-10 plane, was on a sightseeing tour of Antarctica when it crashed into the slopes of Mount Erebus on Ross Island. All 257 passengers and crew on board were killed instantly, shocking New Zealanders and the rest of the world. This event led to significant developments in aviation safety, transparency and accountability. Sir Edmund Hillary, one of the first climbers to have reached the summit of Mount Everest, was scheduled to act as the commentator and tour guide for the fatal flight, but he had to cancel because of other commitments. That other commitment saved his life. He was replaced with his longtime friend and climbing companion, Peter Mulgrew, who died instead. I mentioned in a previous video of mine that I made 2 years ago about the old gold miner who lived alone in a basic hut near Lindy's Pass Historic Hotel, and he was one of the 257 victims of this plane crash. Prior to this event, Air New Zealand had not experienced a crash resulting in the death of passengers. Flight TE901 was a popular sightseeing venture that had been operating for 2 years. The attraction allowed passengers a glimpse of the stark icy landscapes of Antarctica, including the towering presence of Mount Erebus. The flight plan included a low-altitude pass over McMurdo Sound, a frozen inlet known for its beautiful and dramatic views, after which the plane was scheduled to return to Auckland. Before the departure of TE901, a navigational programming error altered the aircraft's route by 2 degrees eastward. This adjustment unknowingly placed the aircraft on a direct collision course with Mount Erebus. The pilots were not informed of this change and were completely unaware of it. Due to whiteout conditions, which occurs in polar regions when snow-covered ground and the sky blend together seamlessly, Captain Jim Collins and First Officer Greg Kaysen were unaware of the looming danger until it was too late. Mount Erebus is an active volcano standing 3,794 metres high. It is located on Ross Island, about 3,500 kilometres from New Zealand. The crash site was difficult to access due to extreme Antarctic conditions. Following the crash, a team of New Zealand and American search and rescue personnel attempted to retrieve the bodies and aircraft wreckage. Recovery efforts were conducted in harsh weather conditions and the operation took several days, leaving a profound emotional impact on the rescuers. Working 24 hours per day over 2 12-hour shifts left the rescuers exhausted. The rescuers said their polar clothing became covered in black human grease, which was caused by the burns on the bodies. To make matters worse, the gulls were eating all the body parts, which caused significant mental anguish to the rescuers and made it difficult for them to identify the bodies. They tried to shoo the birds away, but nothing worked and they had to bury the remains of the people under the snow to keep the birds off. Rescuers have spoken about the lasting psychological trauma of the crash. They were awarded Special Air Service medals for the stress they endured. The Mount Erebus disaster triggered 2 major investigations that revealed vastly different perspectives on what led to the crash. The first was the Chippendale Report conducted by New Zealand's Chief Inspector of Air Accidents, Ron Chippendale. His findings placed significant blame on pilot error, citing the decision to fly low in poor visibility. Air New Zealand was satisfied with this conclusion. However, this finding was challenged by Justice Peter Mahorn, appointed to lead a Royal Commission of Inquiry. Mahorn's investigation revealed critical details that were overlooked in Chippendale's report, notably the unannounced navigational change made to the flight path without the knowledge of the flight crew. He accused Air New Zealand of an orchestrated litany of lies, alleging that they had intentionally misled investigators and manipulated evidence to absolve responsibility. The pilot, Jim Collins, was an experienced pilot who had accumulated 11,151 flight hours, including 2,872 hours in the DC-10, so he was very experienced at flying that aircraft. Mahon did not believe this disaster was his fault when Air New Zealand failed to tell him about the flight path change. However, neither Captain Collins nor co-pilot Cassin had flown the route to Antarctica before, so it was the first time either of these pilots had flown this route. Arguably, Air New Zealand should have chosen either a captain or co-pilot who had flown this dangerous Antarctic route before, rather than both of them being new to this route. Here is the black box recording that I found on Wikipedia. The Mahon report shook public faith in Air New Zealand and led to a demand for higher standards of oversight, transparency and corporate accountability in the airline industry. Mahon's findings were later contested, with Air New Zealand disputing accusations of a cover-up, and his litany of lies statement was challenged in court. However, New Zealanders remained sceptical and feared flying, particularly as 257 deaths is a significant number when New Zealand only had a population of 3 million people at the time, so everyone knew someone who had died on that flight. In addition to legal implications, the families of the victims experienced a prolonged legal battle to obtain justice and compensation. For them, the crash represented not only a tragic loss, but also betrayal by a respected national airline. Additionally, families were initially told the aircraft was simply late returning to New Zealand, and it wasn't until 8 hours after the crash that a press release finally informed the nation that the aircraft was believed to be lost. By that time, the families knew the passengers must have died, because the plane would have run out of fuel by that time. The Mount Erebus disaster remains one of the darkest days in New Zealand's history. Memorials have been erected in New Zealand and Antarctica to honour the victims. In 2009, a special service was held in Auckland to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the disaster. 30 years after the disaster, Air New Zealand issued an apology. Sorry to everyone affected who did not receive the compassion and support they should have from Air New Zealand, Chief Executive Rob Fyfe said. The incident also led to significant improvements in aviation safety all over the world, particularly in polar regions where navigation and communication challenges add to harsh environmental conditions. Even though this disaster occurred before I was born, it was a significant talking point when I was a small child, and it regularly appeared on the news. I remember many adults were heartbroken over this incident, and pilots and airline hostesses were particularly upset. The staff at Air New Zealand were strongly affected by this disaster. So since it is November 28th, let's remember the people who lost their lives on this tragic sightseeing flight. Rest in peace.